All right, thank you so much for joining in on the GreenPath webinar today, Navigating the World of Financial Services. We are so excited to share with you some of our knowledge. With me today, I have GreenPath's Learning Experience Designer, Omari Hall. My name is Tina Ponder, and I am a Partner Experience Manager here with GreenPath. I see some familiar faces here, so welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to give Omari a chance to introduce himself to all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. My name is Omari Hall, and I'm a learning experience designer here at GreenPath.
Okay, great. So Omari, before we kind of jump into all of the good stuff that we'll be talking about today, can you give us a little bit more information about what a learning experience designer does? What do y'all do?
Yeah, so at GreenPath, we get to spend a lot of time thinking about human-centered design. And basically what that means is creating experiences with the client, the people at the center. So for example, research suggests that classroom style learning is one way to teach that can be effective. Another effective strategy might be to create digital experiences that may simulate real scenarios and help to give context to the information that we're learning around financial wellness.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it sounds to me like very, hands-on experiences, experiences that we can relate to, and experiences that are really tangible. Awesome.
Definitely.
All right. So what we'll be covering today with Omari is we'll give you just a quick overview of who GreenPath is. A lot of you might be new to GreenPath. A lot of you might not know about us. So we'll go ahead and give you kind of a quick 101. We also want to talk to you about what financial wellness is. So GreenPath financial wellness is in our name. What does that mean? We want to talk to you today about what financial services are. So we'll be talking about alternative financial services versus traditional financial services. And then we'll do a quick Q&A with Omari, specifically about his work with inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And we will leave time at the end for questions and of course, wrap up. We want to encourage everybody who's with us today to give GreenPath a call to go through a financial wellness session with us. It's free and confidential with GreenPath. The phone number is up here on the screen, and we really encourage you to take advantage of this resource that's available to you. All right. So kind of jumping in to get us started, we would like to tell you a little bit about who GreenPath is, who we are, and what we do. GreenPath started out in the basement of the Michigan Credit Union League and have been around since 1961. For nearly 60 years, we've been there for people on their financial wellness journeys. We like to say that we're there for people during the good times and the not so good times. So we're there during all of life's curveballs. We do encourage you to visit greenpath.com to learn more information about us. And for those of you who are new to GreenPath and just learning about us today, as I mentioned before, please know that our sessions are free, they're confidential, so we make sure that we take your privacy very seriously. We are licensed to counsel in all 50 states. By phone. In some cases, we do have field offices in certain locations. Right now, because of the pandemic, of course, those are closed. However, we are still available here over the phone. We offer the counseling in English and in Spanish on demand. We also have a telelanguage service. So if you do have any family members or friends, or you're more comfortable talking about finances in a different language, we offer the telelanguage service in over 300 languages. GreenPath, we are also a nonprofit HUD approved housing counseling agency. So in addition to being a nonprofit financial wellness organization and education organization, we do provide housing coaching and counseling, and we are approved by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to provide mortgage counseling as well as rental counseling. And really our mission is to help people. We want to empower people to lead financially healthy lives and really be there for everyone on their financial wellness journey so that they can achieve their dreams.
All right. So before we got into the meat of the conversation today, I wanted to pose a question to the group. It's interesting to consider when we think about access to financial education and conversations around finance or the lack thereof. Tell us about what you learned about finances when you were growing up and how. So I actually want to take a few minutes here to kind of reflect on that. And if you wouldn't mind entering some of those thoughts into the chat for us.
So you should see on the lower right-hand side of your screen a Q&A box, but you should also see a chat function. And we just want you to take a couple of minutes to chat in, tell us what you learned about finances when you were growing up and how did you learn about those? We're going to turn on our thinking music and kind of go through what's rolling on in. Omari, I'm seeing some really good answers here.
Yeah. So some common themes that are reflected here are not getting a lot of formal education through high school or college, but picking up what you can from family, um, some teachers, it looks like some folks did have a personal finance class in high school, which is really awesome. And then there's other folks that kind of had to figure it out on their own with opening savings accounts at an early age, to kind of figure it out on their own. But what we're seeing here, it seems like the common theme is a combination of maybe not having a ton of formal opportunities for education, but learning a lot from your parents and your family and your immediate circle.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like the family, like the parents and the grandparents. And I'm also seeing like some sayings that people picked up from parents and grandparents too, which I love.
Yeah, those are always good, and it's really nice that a lot of these things are really solid, and they even as finance has started to change and some of the math on some of the stuff is a little different than it used to be. A lot of these concepts still hold up, which is really good.
Yeah, this is awesome. So we love hearing about all of your thoughts and ideas on this, and then also just kind of your experiences because it really does shape how we interact with the world and how we interact with money and funds, right? And it really helps us to understand why we make the choices we make. So,
Absolutely.
you know, as far as what y'all learned about finances when you were growing up and how you did, I know for me, we didn't have anything formal that was like, this is the formal financial wellness definition. This is what it means. So we did want to share with you because we are talking a lot about financial wellness today. We wanted to kind of give you a framework and share with you the definition that we use at GreenPath, which is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And really, financial wellness, I always say it's much more about how you're feeling, it's about how you're doing, it's much more about your financial health, not about wealth, right? So it's not about how much money you have, it's really about the quality of life that you're living. And financial wellness is made up of four components that you see on the screen here. And the first component of financial wellness is feeling in control of your finances. So feeling in control could mean, I track my expenses, I keep a spending plan or a budget, I'm not living paycheck to paycheck. And I'm not completely out of control. I've got some kind of sense and security in my abilities and how I'm tracking that. So really how well we are in control of our day-to-day finances, it's a critical piece to achieving our financial goals and dreams.
Definitely. And the next aspect of financial wellness is going to be the ability to absorb financial shock. And that's really just a fancy way of saying emergency savings, right? Now more than ever in a COVID environment, we've learned how important it is to be able to adjust and to be flexible. Having that emergency savings, and again, not necessarily having like a secret vault of wealth that you can dive into, but just maybe a month or two's worth of savings to absorb maybe a missed mortgage payment or a car payment in case of an emergency. Because as 2020 has made abundantly clear for all of us, it's not a matter of when there'll be an emergency that you'll need to kind of dig into, but It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So in this case, having that ability to absorb financial shock will allow you to will help you to avoid falling behind on some of your other obligations and still be able to keep yourself afloat in case of hardship.
All right, great. And sorry about that. I was just trying to close something out on my screen that I thought I had shut down. All right. So the third component I think is my favorite because I always was the child that needed to know the why. And I think I still am that way. I still ask the why. Why do I have to do all of this work? What is this for? And really my favorite part of what we do at GreenPath and part of our counseling is we help people establish and create their financial goals to get where they want to be. So the third component of financial wellness is having the ability to meet financial goals. If you're looking for like a personal trainer for your finances, I really encourage you to give GreenPath a call so that we can go over the financial goals with you, kind of get those created, and we can take those steps so that you can buy that home. Or, if you are looking to replenish your emergency savings, I know our household is. We had a job loss and then a reduction in income during this COVID shenanigans. We really want to help you to figure out, how do I get that replenished? How do I make it realistic? And how do I make it work for me?
Absolutely. And the fourth and final component of the financial wellness definition is the ability to, or the flexibility to enjoy life. So financial wellness is all about being happy, healthy, and living a quality of life. And again, not necessarily about wealth, but the flexibility to enjoy life means that you're able to realize your dreams. What might that look like for you? Maybe it's taking a vacation every year. Maybe it's being able to afford your kids after school activities. Maybe it's being able to enjoy the holidays without going broke. At the end of the day, really what financial wellness is, it's a critical component to helping you achieve your dreams and live the life that you want.
Yeah. And as we're looking at the definition, before we move on, you don't have to chat this in. I do, though, encourage you to think about, where am I on my financial wellness journey? Where do I fit into this definition? I know for our household, we're really in that capacity to absorb shock. That's really where we're kind of fitting. Like, we've done a lot of work, 2019 and 2020. We did a lot of work on the feeling and control part and kind of getting those good habits going. But now it's like, okay, let's prepare. So I really am looking forward to like moving more into the ability to meeting financial goals, which I know will come once we kind of have the basics covered.
Absolutely, I can relate to that for sure. I would say at this stage, for me, it's really about um, absorbing that financial shock of the adjustments having to be made during COVID, and also working towards becoming debt free. I've had some personal, you know, family situations that have caused me to take on a little bit more of a leadership role in terms of managing the finances, which is one thing when you do it for your job to help other people with their finances, but it's a different thing entirely when you have to apply that knowledge to your own situation. So rest assured, those of us who may be going through this, you're not alone. And even us experts are continually having to learn these things as we go along. So, but it's helped me. The work that I've done here at GreenPath has helped me keep in perspective that the solutions are always, or the strategies at least, are always within arm's width. All right. So with that in mind, we also recognize that we all don't share the same lived reality, right? We know that we all face unique challenges that may make achieving these financial goals a little bit more difficult. With that in mind, we would like you to tell us about some of the barriers that you may have faced or may be still facing in your financial journey. So again, why don't we take a couple of minutes to chat some of these responses? So again, what were some barriers that you have faced in your financial wellness journey?
Yeah, and Omari, you mentioned that like you've had some family things that have happened to lead you to be like more of like head of household, like more financial responsibility. And I've
Sure.
had the same, like I think being young, I'm in my mid 30s, and like having the student loans, that's definitely a barrier. And then when you throw on like taking care of other family members, like I'm a caretaker for my mom, and I'm got guardianship over my younger brother who's a teenager. I mean, that is a barrier that's definitely been thrown in my way on my financial wellness journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I see like unexpected popping up. What else are you saying?
Yeah, unemployment, unexpected expenses. Again, I imagine that whether it's related to COVID or not, these are things that folks face all the time. One thing that I really resonate with here is a lack of taught financial literacy. And we'll get more into that a little bit later, but this idea of there being a scarcity or maybe in an imbalance in terms of the availability of financial resources is something that really can affect um, that journey towards financial wellness. Again,
Yeah, I like that.
unexpected expenses here seems to be a theme here. Not having a safety net, we talked about that, absorbing financial shock, maybe living paycheck to paycheck and feeling insecure in that sense, or just not really feeling confident that if an emergency hit that you'd be able to maintain. You were saying, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying that I see a lot of like life changes in here too. Like people are throwing out like health costs, or like my income went from one income down to nothing, or two incomes down to one. I'm a single parent now, divorce, like life changes. We always tell our people that any time that you're going through a major life event, it's a great time to give GreenPath a call to help you on your health journey, because your financial wellness, it's part of your overall health. Like I know with all of my family changes, and these barriers, like it's impacted my own physical health too. So I think
Totally.
that's really, it's really nice to see in a way, even though these are barriers, that we're not alone and like we're all going through this together.
Absolutely. So when we think about barriers, this is where the idea of financial inclusion comes into play. And it really, that's about achieving your financial goals and dreams, and living in a world where everyone is included in that achieving of those dreams, regardless of your background. So if you do a quick Google search, you'll find that the definition of financial inclusion is the availability and equality of opportunities to access financial resources. And while this is an adequate definition, I think it would serve us to go a little bit deeper. Furthermore, GreenPath believes that for, in order to create opportunity to access financial services, it's essential to do the work to understand um, how the circumstances of another underrepresented group may be different from that of the standard client, and then use these data points to create new or modify existing programs specifically to meet the needs of these communities. So let's talk a little more about our personal stories and backgrounds as a starting point to open up that discussion about financial inclusion, access, barriers, and maximization of financial services. Tina?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to talk about our stories and our backgrounds. I want to reread that definition of financial inclusion, because I still am like wrapping my brain around that. Um, can we just read that one more time?
Sure. Or do you want the Google definition or the GreenPath
I like the
modified
green path
definition?
definition. Like if I was
Okay.
asking you what financial inclusion was, what would you say to me? Like, Tina, this is what it means.
What it means is doing the work. Again, I'm gonna go away from my notes here. What really means is seeking understanding as to what makes the circumstances of one community different from that of another, and then
Okay.
doing what's necessary to overcome some of those boundaries as best you can and create a scenario where there is access to the same financial opportunity, specifically with those barriers in mind. So, for example, the um, issues that may be plaguing a community primarily a primarily Black community may be different from that of a suburban community, right? And so we need to make sure that we have the tools in place to provide similar opportunity so that the end goal, right, the outcomes are similar and the outcomes are equitable. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you for going over that again. And I like to hear things like in layman's terms too, right? So I loved that. Yeah. Um, so you're gonna see some of like what Omari was kind of defining in our stories because we when we started doing this webinar together and we started talking to each other, we're like, wow, like we actually have a lot in common with our backgrounds. And some of the barriers have been similar and some different. So my kind of upbringing is that I had a father in my life up until I was about 8. And they were kind of like my family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was like your 1980s like sales powerhouse, made tons of money. And then all of the sudden, like one day, that was gone based on some health issues that my dad had. And then we became uh a family where my mom was raising 3 kids by herself completely. So we moved from, the house that we were living in with my dad, and we moved to a different suburb. So I grew up in the suburbs. I am a first generation college student. So even though I had a pretty good buildup of wealth my first half of my life, the second half of my life was very challenging. And I think that the most challenging time in my life was when I moved out and went on my own as a first generation college student. Like I didn't know anything. I applied to one college because I didn't know any better, didn't know I could do better. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going through the motions. This is what I'm doing. And being raised by my mom, I still, when I was in college, had to help her quite a bit with money. I paid for her utility bill. I paid for her electric bill up until I was probably 28 years old. And I was like living out of state on my own. And yet her electricity bill was like still in my name. So I've had a lot of like unique challenges growing up. And that's been my background with finances. And I was telling Omari that most of what I learned was not from my parents. It was more like modeled behavior of like, I don't want to be stressed out like that. I don't want to live my life that way. Or things that I had picked up from my grandparents, but nobody ever spelled it out for me. So,
Was on mute there. Absolutely. And I really appreciate you sharing some of that with us here. I really resonate with a lot of what you brought to light. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, which is a city that many of us no doubt know has had a lot of challenges, challenges like a decimated economy, disenfranchisement on a citywide level. Um, and the reality of the situation is that these challenges have disproportionately affected communities of color. And I can imagine that many urban areas that have a similar history probably have similar outcomes, right? Like, for example, I imagine it's probably feels pretty familiar that communities all across the United States have communities like Detroit have severely limited access to resources and information on financial literacy, in particular financial education. And as a result, productive conversations around financial health can be made harder. And that misinformation and mystery around areas like credit and budgeting may become a little bit more pervasive. And so this may lead to the entry points. And when I say entry points, what I mean is um, where you might start interacting within the financial system, whether that means getting a bank account, applying for a loan, starting a savings plan, right? These entry points can sometimes be harder to access for members of communities like this and like the one that I grew up around. Furthermore, fiduciary institutions like banks, credit unions are often scarcer in these communities. And instead, what one might find a little bit more easily would be some alternative banking services. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think like what's resonating with me is you saying entry points and like kind of defining it. Just even for me, having a definition of what it is it can help me to navigate things easier. So just
And
knowing
that
that like, oh wow, like this is an entry point, right? Like teaching my 16-year-old brother about this stuff, like I'm trying to create a path for him so he doesn't have to go through all of the hoops and barriers and roadblocks that I've had to experience, trying to make that easier for him.
And just one note on that. I mean, the importance of pointing out something like an entry point is really to focus, or really to kind of bring to light, relating back to the discussion around financial inclusion, that these
Mhm.
entry points may be different in some communities that have had a certain experience versus another, right? If you're someone who has grown up with support around financial literacy, your parents got you set up on a savings account when you were, in middle school. You were a co borrower on your parents' credit card ever since you were 5 years old, right? These steps that were taken proactively to help bolster your financial potential outcomes. That's a really awesome privilege to have that. The reality of the situation is that there are a lot of communities who the many different reasons, some of which I just discussed, may not have had that sort of support. And their entry points into the financial world, they may feel a lot less prepared, right? And it's important to recognize that this is not their fault, right? This is the result of, we could give an entire podcast, an entire webinar on this topic, but it's as a result of a lot of disenfranchisement, and our goal here, while focusing on inclusion, is to make sure that we understand what those barriers are and create bridges to help folks overcome those, so that we can all end up at the same outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I love the elaboration on that because it leads really well into the next question. And
Mhm.
I know I'm going to share some more, right, about kind of my background as we get into more of the services part of the discussion. But I think one of the questions that we really wanted to ask everyone is, what is one thing that you wish you would have known about financial services years ago? So if you want to throw your answers into the chat box, Omari and I are going to kind of talk about this because we've talked a lot about this as we were creating this webinar. I was explaining to Omari that I've never felt like I've belonged anywhere. I've always felt like I'm an outsider. And I know that that sounds very cliche, but especially in the financial world, I've kind of had one foot in one world and one foot in the other because I did grow up in the suburbs. I grew up in a very affluent community in Michigan where like we had one of the top school districts and everybody had parents who were like lawyers or engineers. I had friends who had parents that were doctors, and I learned that this is what wealth looks like, but I don't have it. We grew up in like a one-bedroom apartment and I had an eviction notice every single month. So, one of the things that I wish I would have like known about financial services is that it's you have the opportunity. Like I wish somebody would have been like, here's the credit union, here's how you apply for a bank account. Like I got thrown into school and I was like, oh shoot, like I need a bank account. Like I learned about it from talking to other people. Like I got a work study job and they're like, where are you going to put your money? I didn't even think about that. I didn't realize that I needed a home for my money. And mind you, one of my mom's like multiple jobs was working at a bank. And she did not pass that to me, because I think that's just, I don't know if it's financial literacy or if it's like the gap in our education system. It could be a lot of different things. But one of the things that I would have known about is that this is how you hold your money. This is how you start. This is what credit looks like, just to give me a starting point. I wish I would have had that.
Totally. I can relate to a lot of that. I also see coming into the chat here, some resonance around that. There's one comment about budgeting, as elementary as it sounds, and certainly, right, like that's something that even as a person who's worked in the financial world for almost 10 years, um, the idea of budgeting when it's your own personal situation is a little different. As counselors, it's easier to be detached and to be very deliberate and intentional about the feedback that you give to your clients. But when it's your own personal finance, it takes a little bit of extra effort to make some of the sacrifices that may be necessary in order for you to properly budget, to properly live in a way that is promoting financial health. Another thing that I see here is investing, saving, whether that be for retirement or just having that nest egg that we were talking about, that ability to absorb financial shock. And also, not all debt is bad debt. I like that a lot because I think that relates to credit, right? Needing to understand how to play the credit game in order to build credit, which then allows you access into loans that may have serious impact on your quality of life, right? Being able to purchase a car, a mortgage. These are things that you need to be involved in the credit game in order to build that credit enough to allow these things to become possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I was chatting back to some of our panelists. I'm like, oh my gosh, everything that the attendees are saying, it's wild to me that money is so important and financial, like just being part of the financial system is so important. But we're like, we still don't know a lot and like we don't talk a lot about it together. So it's just really nice to have this space.
Totally.
All right. So Omari is going to go into some more detail here about some of the common barriers, and he'll also kind of talk about some of his learnings as well.
Yeah. So when we talk about common barriers, some of the things that we have here on the screen are things that pop up often. Imperfect credit, lack of cosigners or relationships, language barriers, right? If you're someone who where English is your second language, maybe an unfamiliarity, maybe a lack of access to technology. And really, a lot of this really boils down to a lack of financial knowledge or lack of familiarity with the financial system. And again, this harkens back to one of our earlier questions that we posed to the group around what were some of the things that you learned on financial literacy coming up. And many of us were honest about the fact that there wasn't a lot of formal training. A lot of it came from observing our families, our parents, which is helpful to some extent, but it's a little different when you are in the driver's seat, right? Um, Another thing that we really have to realize, and I've kind of intimated at this throughout our presentation here today, but one of the realities here is that these situations disproportionately impact communities of color and other disenfranchised communities, right? Communities where there's low income or a lack of infrastructure or disenfranchisement, right? These things trickle down in a way or multiply in a way that make it even harder to escape from that situation. Whether it be due to a lack of all other alternatives, like not a lot of banks, not a lot of credit unions in the area, or and in some cases a distrust between some of these communities and those banking institutions. The good news is there are strides on all sides looking to mend some of those relationships and make these interactions a lot more equitable. With that in mind, Tina, if you go to the next slide here,
Yep.
we talked about some of those barriers and some of those common barriers. As a result of some of these barriers, in some communities, what we'll find is alternative services becoming a lot more prevalent. And when I say alternative services here are a few of the ones that are more common. So you might see something like a payday loan, um, maybe a check cashing service, a title loan where you might put something, offer something that you own, like a car for collateral, rent to own, an alternative for taking out a loan on something that you might want to buy, pawn shops where you can sell things off for a quick profit. Many of these institutions can accurately be described as predatory. There's no doubt about it. Some leverage the scarcity of other viable financial options and more lenient prerequisites. So, for example, lower credit score requirements, no down payments. They leverage that to charge exorbitantly high rates and fees. And I recognize that many of us are in different walks of our lives, and that you might think, well, shouldn't folks know better? I mean, it's really a complicated conversation on multiple fronts. So, for example, a lot of people do know better, right? They do know that these are harmful situations, but whether due to convenience or a lack of any other viable options, the decision to go this route is made anyways. Additionally, it's important to also consider the familiarity that this and space that the community in the community that these places hold, right? So, and this might sound initially odd, but when you consider that people who work in these spaces are often members of the community themselves, it's not hard to imagine a scenario where this type of financial service, while definitely more harmful than helpful in most cases, can feel less intimidating than a traditional bank or credit union, right? So the point of me going through all that is to make sure that we have the empathy to understand that, like, while these are bad situations, there's a why behind it. With that being said, though, now that we understand the why behind some of that, we can still stress to clients definitely to avoid these types of alternative financial situations as often as possible. They can be very, very expensive in the long run, and many create cycles that are really hard to break. So, just taking a payday loan, for example, these loans on average can carry an interest rate of almost 400% on average. Additionally, since about 69% of folks who take out payday loans use them for utilities and other reoccurring expenses, the client usually ends up rolling that loan over into another payday loan about 80% of the time. And that cycle can last up to 11 months or more, right? So this is going to result in a scenario where someone can end up spending thousands of dollars on fees and interest despite initially only taking out a $500 loan. So again, just an example of how these are really potentially harmful. But there is hope, though. With more traditional banks making financial inclusion more of a priority, there's an opportunity for more people to find help. So Tina, let's talk a little bit more about some of those traditional banking options.
Yeah, I'm just kind of anytime we talk about payday loans and the interest rates and the percentages, I work at GreenPath. I am not a math whiz. But whenever you say like 400%, just like wrapping my brain around like what does that even mean? And it really like hit home when I had a client come into the office that I was working out of in San Antonio, and she was like, I was like, "How long have you been paying this loan for?" And she's like, I've been working with them for 23 years. So she was probably in that 80% of people that are like rolling it over. And I
Mhm.
think the interest rate was like 167%. And I'm like, okay, like what does that even mean? Because with traditional financial services, like with a credit card, for example, a high interest rate might be like a 26.99%, right? So it's just kind of
Yeah.
showing like, hey, this is like how much it really is. So when you're kind of thinking about, well, where do I go for these traditional financial services? A lot of what Omari like laid out with the alternatives, like that's like where we used to go like growing up. Like
Mhm.
we knew people at the pawn shop, like like it was like fun to go there. Like it was familiar. They give you like free hot dogs. They have like raffles, like they do a bunch of stuff. And so it's interesting, like when I get out into this world, it's like, no, like this is like what traditional is considered, right? So banks and credit unions are really a great way to start. And I wish that I would have known kind of like, what is a bank? What is a credit union? What are the differences between it? And really, banks, they have customers. So banks are typically like for-profit financial institutions, and then credit unions, in a nutshell, are nonprofit, member-owned financial institutions. There's no right or wrong. There's no like good or bad when it comes to banks or credit unions. I actually utilize both. I have a bank. I also have two accounts with credit unions. And what I love about both of them is that, they offer different things, they offer different conveniences. When I moved out of state, it was really nice to have a bank so that when I was living in New York, for example, I could go to an ATM anywhere because it was a larger financial institution. Like I knew right where to find it. it was more convenient. But then for savings purposes, credit unions typically tend to have a little bit of higher interest rates on their savings products that I could earn. So I utilize them to my advantage. It's almost like playing the credit game, right? It's like, where do you feel comfortable with? You can always go online as well. If you're like, I've never heard of a credit union before, I don't know what's in my area, you can always do a quick Google search. There's I Love My Credit Union website that you can also go to, which will send you some of this information out so that y'all have it at the end of this session so that you can kind of take a look to be like, all right, what is the cheat sheet on this? But really, credit unions and banks, they typically offer like your traditional credit builder loans, your credit cards. They might offer like a secured credit card, which Omari will talk about a little bit later. And it's just like a nice place to hold your money that also offers other products and services to help you to play, quote unquote, the credit game a little bit easier. Of course, we talked about checking and savings accounts. Credit unions and banks both offer those. When we talk about home loans and auto loans, I think that this is really interesting because when we think about what people tell us, Omari, I counseled for 6.5 years, you counseled for a long time as well. And one of the main things that we hear from people that call GreenPath is they're interested in buying a home. Like, you ask people, what is your main goal? Or what would you like to do? And a lot of people are like, yeah, like I want to buy a home. Okay, when do you want to buy a home? In the next 6 to 12 months, right? And sometimes we'll take a look at the situation and we're like, we've got to make a more realistic timeline on this. And so home loans are one of those kind of traditional financial services that I would say everybody wants a piece of. Like we all want something that we can invest in. We usually want something that we can call our own. And why not a home, right? That's I guess the basic kind of traditional American dream, if you will. That's kind of the archetype for what it is. So for home loans, when you think about the history of it, when it started, I think like the first home loan was in like 1781 or something like that. But when the mortgage industry really took off in the United States, that was in the 1930s. And that was when the government was giving a lot of kind of incentives, for people to get homes. And the average age for people getting married back in the day was very young. It was 22. And I think the average age nowadays is about 34. And the average home buyer back then was between like 22 and 25. And now it's about 35 years old. So as time changes, these products, these traditional loan products of having a fixed interest rate for 30 years or a fixed interest rate for 15 years, mortgages really have kind of stayed the same as a traditional loan product. So a lot of people, they're, nearing retirement or they're going to have to be working for 20 more years by the time they get into a mortgage. So that's just something to really think about when you're thinking about these traditional financial services is what's right for you. And when you are getting into home loans, there are alternative financial services for home loans that might offer that instant gratification, like your land contract to own. I saw that a lot in Texas. I see those a lot out in San Antonio and Austin still, where a private investor might give you a 13% interest rate on a home loan when traditionally with a bank or a credit union you might get like 3 to 5%, right? But you've got to wait a little bit longer to get into your home loan with a lower interest rate. So I think those are just some of the things that when we're talking about traditional versus alternative that I wish we would have known about before we just jumped into the world. And that's something that GreenPath can kind of walk you through and talk to you about is like what makes the best sense for you? How can we help you be financially healthy with the least stress possible? And how can we help you to get to where you want to be? And the same goes for auto loans too. Like banks and credit unions, they both offer, some pretty great loan products for auto loans for cars and boats and, whatever you need, a truck. But if you go to these alternative places, they might offer you something instantly, but the interest rate might be a lot higher and you might be paying on it for a lot longer. So I always tell people like make sure that you look at all of your options because I'm one of those folks that believes that there's always an option. You don't always have to jump at the first. And then with credit cards, what's really great about traditional financial services as well is that there are ways to play the credit game without getting yourself into a bunch of retail credit card debt. And Omari is going to talk a little bit about that, but essentially, a credit card is, a plastic card, right? And it allows you to pay for something now when you would have to make payments for it over time, right? So it's kind of getting the product now and you're borrowing the money and making monthly payments until it's paid off to get it. So a lot of times with credit cards, they come with a cost, but the helpful thing is that you get it now, right? So we always try to tell our clients like, there are good ways to use the credit. I saw something in the chat earlier that said, I wish that I would have known that all debt wasn't bad. There's a good way to use it, and then there's a way to use it that might be considered unhealthy, right? So Omari's going to talk to us about how to maximize these financial services so that we can use them in the healthiest way possible.
Totally. So thank you for that. That was super informative. The first thing that I'll say in terms of maximizing your financial services to reach your dreams, GreenPath a call. We are a financial nonprofit focused on education and resources. So the goal is for us to help you understand what options you have, create a holistic step-by-step action plan to help you set the right expectations and know what you need to do to get to that end goal. The good news is though, I'm going to give you a strategy. I'm going to give you a quick strategy here right now, right? We talked about, and it's all tied into this idea of not all debt being bad debt. We talked about credit cards. We talked about credit, right? So building credit and understanding what steps you need to take in order to start that credit building process. So taking a low credit score, for example, one really easy way to start that process to both control the debt that you have and also start to improve your credit score is something that we like to call the set it and forget it method. So just a quick example, right? Say you were able to get a small secure credit card from your bank or credit union. Say it's a $200 secure credit card, and secure credit card means that you would, since maybe you're in a place where your credit's not fully developed yet, or you're still working on improving your credit, your bank will be willing to work with you to provide a card for you, but they may require that you put down your own down payment first before they give you the card. So say, for example, if there's a secure credit card worth $200, they will ask you for a $200 deposit that they'll use as collateral against that 200 or against that credit line. And basically you're paying yourself back each month. It's a good way to start building credit. It's a good entry point into playing the credit game. And so with that in mind, one really easy strategy, especially in this sort of digital age where many of us are doing subscriptions, we do stuff like Netflix, Hulu, etc. Try taking one or two of your subscriptions, whether it be Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, whatever the case, and assign them to your secure credit card so that it's paid every month through that credit card. The next thing that you would want to do is then set the credit card to be paid in full each month. Again, not the minimum, pay in full each month automatically. Most credit cards, secure credit cards, will give you the option to do that. It might be something you could do online, or it might be something that you'd have to call in, but most will give you the opportunity to do that. So now what you've got is you've got an automated billing service. You've got your Amazon or your Netflix getting charged to your secure credit card every month, and you also have automatically your secured credit card being paid off in full each month. So now you've got an automated situation where you can have your credit card working for you and being paid, so it's out of sight, out of mind, without you being tempted to spend that card and charge it up in a way that's unhealthy, right? You could even put it in a drawer somewhere, not even have it near you, and it's still working for you, right? So that's a nice sort of a life hack, as if you want to call it, that can help you get started on that credit building process with a little bit of ease. Hopefully does that make sense, Tina?
Yeah, I love, like, we were talking about this earlier and he's like, I'm going to talk about the set it and forget it. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, I never heard that. Like, I never use that in my counseling. So I like that Omari put like a kind of a strategy, like word behind it, like a set it and forget it. I won't
Mm-hmm.
forget that. Like, I'm never going to forget that now. So I like that little life hack. Um,
Yeah.
I have a question coming in, and I think I think it's appropriate that we address it right now. We will
Sure.
be offering some time for Q&A later, but somebody asked, do you offer secured credit cards? And is there a minimum score required for approval? So GreenPath, a lot of people call us and they think that we've got money to lend, or they think that we are, like a bank or a credit union. GreenPath does not have any kind of money to lend. We don't have any products or services that are loans at GreenPath. What we can do is we can tell you, based on your financial situation, these are the types of products that we would recommend, or the types of services that we would recommend that you seek out. We're not able to give you a specific like lender or financial institution to go to, but we certainly can help navigate and help you figure out what would best fit your situation. As far as the approval goes, we absolutely can talk to you about what that might look like, because different financial institutions, banks and credit unions, a lot of times it's not like a set, this is how much you have to have, this is the score that we look for. That can vary depending on the financial institution. At GreenPath, though, what we can do is we can tell you, like, it's likely that this might be a really good fit for you. It's likely that, something like Credit Karma might tell you to apply for this, but that's not what we might recommend, right? So it's always good to kind of reach out to us like one-on-one. We can customize that answer for you to give you some better, a better path forward. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So, Omari, I've got some questions for you. Are you ready?
Sure.
So I know that we talked about a lot about kind of barriers and inclusion and access specifically. And this is probably the part that I'm the most excited for, and what a lot of our folks are on here today to learn about. So you've been doing a lot of research, like you've been doing a lot of work with the inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Can you talk to us a little bit more about like what that is and the work that you're doing with it?
Sure. So I actually forgot that this picture was in this presentation, and the reason why I bring that up is because I almost wore that jacket for this presentation, which would have been a little ridiculous. Um,
It's a good jacket.
I like it. No, it is. It's nice. So yeah, essentially, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access is an initiative that GreenPath is committed to. And what it means is to really show up authentically with awareness of strengths and opportunities, both internally and externally. So what that means is internally, we want to make sure that Black, Indigenous, POC, other members of the LGBTQIA community, other underrepresented groups within GreenPath feel safe and respected, and that their voices are heard and uplifted. Externally, GreenPath is committed to acknowledging systemic disadvantages that underinvested communities face, and understand how those experiences impact their path towards financial wellness, and then create experiences and resources designed to earnestly meet those needs with those challenges in mind. It sort of goes back to this idea of financial inclusion, right? We want to really make sure that that happens.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we basically just want to make sure that everybody, is met where they're at. We're not missing anybody. There's no missed opportunities. Everybody is going to be able to have a customized path to get to where they're going. And we want to be able to make it easier for people, right?
Definitely. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Omari. I'm excited to hear. I know that his work is still in the works, right? It's still in the making. He's
Yeah, I mean,
researching, boots on the ground. Can you talk just a little bit about what you're
sure.
doing in the local community?
So GreenPath is a Michigan-based company, even though we are um, nationwide in terms of our reach. And so as a result, the first, and as a Detroit native, one of the first things that I noticed when I started working here is the fact that despite how much excellent work GreenPath does, there's not as big a footprint in the city of Detroit as I would feel comfortable with, right? Because as I've talked about earlier in the presentation, Detroit is a community that really could benefit from some of the resources that GreenPath has to offer. And so the goal is to figure out how we might show up more authentically to meet the needs of folks in Detroit. And in order to do that, this is where these earnest conversations around financial equity, and inclusion come into play, because in order to make change or to help make change, we need to first understand the nature of what these barriers are and how they came to be. And so we've tried to, COVID has obviously made it difficult, but we've tried to have conversations with Detroiters to understand from their perspective what these challenges are, and what they think some of the solutions may be. And one of the early results of that ongoing work is that we heard that there was a need, a true need, to understand credit better, and that those entry points, that the information around credit that already exists is a little bit unattainable. It's a little bit not really relevant to the situations that many folks are in. You know, there are folks that aren't banked, that may not have a savings account, that might not have consistent income, and therefore the information out there that pertains to how you might improve your credit might not always make sense. It might not always be relevant. So we are building, have built a credit tool, a digital learning experience that takes into consideration where your starting point might be, where you might be in terms of your credit journey, and give information around credit and how you might build credit that speaks to where you're starting from, that speaks to your starting point. It has that in mind. And that's something that we're testing right now, and pretty good about it, but it's something we want to get out in front of folks to make sure that it's actually helping. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Omari. All right,
Absolutely.
so we've got a lot of questions coming through the chat. We have about 3 minutes left for the webinar portion, so we wanted to wrap that up and then we'll hop back to the questions. And we have those captured in the chat, so we can always send out any answers that we might have later along with the recording. As we wrap up and we think about kind of what Omari was talking about with some barriers and inclusion and making sure that all of us have access to all of these healthy resources, we wanted to know from you, just to get you motivated, especially because we're still in the beginning part of 2021. What are some of your financial goals and dreams? Can you share those in the chat box for us? I think mine, honestly, like I mentioned this in the beginning, but I think I'll be able to start thinking bigger and happier once we have our savings account like back to quote unquote normal, you know, once I can sleep a little bit better at night. But I think one of my financial goals is like to reduce stress and feel a little bit more prepared because I am such a planner. I've got buy a home, free from student debt. I'm right there with you. I can retire, I can travel. So all of these things that y'all are kind of throwing in here, you know, we want to say that we're here to help you. You know, we are the financial wellness experts here at GreenPath. Feel free to give us a call. We're always here to help you on your financial wellness journey, no matter where you are. If you're just getting started, or if, you know, maybe you've hit a bump in the road, or maybe just like life has changed and you're like, okay, like I think I'm doing okay, but I need some validation. You know, I need that from you. Feel free to give us a call, 877-337-3399. It's free and confidential to talk to us. If you want to learn more about us, you can also visit GreenPath online, and you can request a call directly from our website as well.
Absolutely.
So I think now I am going to stop the recording for right now, Omari, and then we will jump into some of the Q&A.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right. So I have somebody that asked, how are you, Omari, facilitating the discussions and the research?
It's a good question. It's been a challenge because of COVID. I have a background as a community organizer, and so in an ideal world, what that would look like would be to find the community spaces, right? Find the spaces where the community gathers and where there are leaders in place already, whether that be a church, a barber shop, a grocery store, some community centric location, and just show up and have conversations with folks that have the reach, some of the leaders that are already there, so that I'm not trying to build. So I'm not having. I can overcome the barrier of being an outsider coming in, right? Even though I'm from Detroit and I may be working in Detroit, that doesn't mean my experience is the same as everyone else's, right? So finding those hub spaces, those community leaders, and having conversations with them to then gather to help the gathering process of the folks in the community that may need to hear this, that may benefit from it, it would be the ideal way. What we've tried to do in a COVID scenario is a similar process, but just using technology, whether it be Zoom or WebEx or whatever kind of digital tool that we have. But it's definitely been a challenge. Technology is something that's still for some communities a privilege, right? Like there's not always equal access to technology, so that's a challenge that we're having to overcome. But it's a good question, and we're doing our best with the tools that we have available.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I did just chat this into the chat, but we do appreciate your time. We know that life is super busy, even though we're kind of virtual right now. I feel like I'm busier than I ever was. So we do want to thank the time that you took to do this webinar today. And we hope that we connect with you soon. Again, visit us online or give us a call. And then we will kind of jump into more of the questions here, Omari.